Acoustic Alternatives from Grove Studios in Ypsilanti, the host of the podcast since, what was that, October of 2020 when they invited me to kind of get my podcast on, even though I said, oh, come on, do we not need another music podcast? And they said, oh, please, just come, check out our place. And I have, and it's a really great place if you're a local musician or even a DJ. They've got rooms for you to practice so you don't have to annoy your neighbors. Their motto is get out of the garage and get into the studio, and it's a cool place to be. I should show Will around. We were just settling in and chatting while we were setting up the microphones. But hey, if you're ever coming to town with your band, you're like, I need to practice before the gig. This is the place, Will.
It is really cool.
Yeah. So this is Will Kimbrough. He's an artist that has been on my radar for many, many years. This coming podcast, which those of you who are regular followers of it, you know my focus is to kind of expose people to the other side of the music industry, the singer-songwriters, the people that are creating art more or less behind the scenes and sometimes in front of people. Not a ton of them are household names, unfortunately. I don't know that Will. I don't think you're a household name, but, oh, God, your resume is impressive.
My wife would say I'm sort of famous in some towns.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. That's exactly right. You got your rock side, your stripped down folk side, your Americana side, there's a country side, you're an in-demand guitar player, producer, songwriter, and I think an author as well. We had an email conversation.
Working on it, yeah.
Working on a book. So we'll get into that. Let's get into your history after you play a song of your choice.
Yeah. So I'm going to play... I think I'm going to play a song. It's the title track to a record I put out in 2019. And I will say that I've got a new record coming out in May of this year called For the Life of Me. And it's been a long time coming. I put a record out in 2020. And that was, it was almost easier to put a record out in 2020 because I didn't have anything else to do except for my work with Songwriting with Soldiers and live streaming from my porch. But I'll do this one. It's just a favorite of mine. And I wrote this sitting in my car on the way to a gig down in Lower Alabama, L.A. And I just wrote the lyrics in my head. So I pulled over and talked them into my phone, and I knew how it was going to go. So then I played it that day at the show at this place called the Frog Pond at Blue Moon Farm, which is kind of a home away from home gig for me, and a gig that almost I could say saved my life or saved my soul during my dad's journey with dementia, which was about a 5 or 6 year time, and so I was down there all the time making that drive, and this is one that I wrote that I like it down here. She asked me, when does the bad luck stop? When do we rise to the top? It's awful hard work pulling up the rear. She said, now honey, don't you want to be a big success? You can buy me a diamond and a wedding dress. I leaned in close and I whispered in her ear, said I like it down here with the hobos and the drunks. I like the hard-bitten rabble with the leaving trunks. Blood in my mud and sawdust in my beer. I like a wake-up call at 1:30, and if I had a job, I would get it done. I can catch real fine trash fish off the pier. I like it down here. Well, she rolled her eyes and she bit her lip. She let a skinny backbone slip, lit a Chesterfield, church keyed another beer. She smiled and she said, I must admit that I always did like a man with grit. And then she slapped my face and called out with a sneer. She said, I like it down here, boss, just as much as you. I like the bilge water and the bus tub stew. I got a 3-legged dog and a one-eyed buccaneer. I like my homemade wine from a scuppernong. I like smoking guns, I love drinking songs. I got a big steam train with a drunken engineer. I like it down here. All right. Well, I like it down here with the hookers and the whiskey priest. I like the bat chain pullers and the shiny beasts. I got a street life lover with a tattoo of a tear. I want a woman with a face like a question mark. You know she cleans up good when it's nice and dark. In a railroad flat with a monkey called Belvedere. Come over here, Belvedere. I like it down here. I like it down here.
Sounding great on the podcast today. Will Kimbrough on Acoustic Alternatives, and a track going back just a few years, and actually a great way to go back in your history, because down here from where we are in Michigan, not too far from where that guitar was built,
Right.
Down here is where you grew up, Alabama, right?
That's right.
Tell me about growing up in Mobile?
Yeah, I'm from Mobile, and Mobile, Alabama is a port city on the bay that there's a huge river delta that the biologist E.O. Wilson, who grew up there in the delta, calls it America's Amazon. So it's an incredible water world, you know, wetland that empties out into Mobile Bay, which empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. So there's rivers and the bay and the Gulf, so it's a watery place.
Mosquitoes.
It's very humid and hot. It's very jungly, subtropical. You know, hurricanes, humidity, beautiful place. Great musicians there, and great culture there, great food. And I grew up in a house full of books, and with parents who, encouraged me to learn how to play music. I don't think they could know how deeply it was going to affect me, and how much I was going to form a band at age 12 and start playing shows.
12?
Yeah. So, that was I got an instrument in order to be in a band. I wanted to be in a band. Mm-hmm. And ironically, now I travel around a lot by myself and play solo, but part of that is the economics of touring.
Yeah.
And also the freedom to play songs that you maybe just wrote. And also just adult life. You know, being in a band is like being in, a multi-spouse marriage, although I don't know anything to compare that to, but
well, that's going to be Utah, I guess.
Then when you do meet your life partner,
yep,
if you're lucky enough to do so, I did back in the early 90s, and we're still together, there's less space in your life for, the Beatles' 8 Days a Week movie, Ringo says it, he goes, we all got married, we all got houses, we all had babies, the band wasn't everything to us, and that's the Beatles. So, they
did okay for themselves.
Why would my band be more important to me than the Beatles were to Ringo? So,
right.
So yeah, it starts to become less important to be in the band. So that was 30 years ago when I was in the Biscuits, and that was my, full-time band at that time, and I got married, and all of a sudden I was like, this isn't as important to me. I still want to do music, but I want to have my family.
Well, what happened before 12? What were you doing, like, as a kid that wasn't music? Was there any, like, possible other path for you ever?
I will say this, and people always chuckle at this because it really does sound like Forrest Gump, but from age 3 to 6, I walked on crutches. I had this condition called leg calf perthes, well, they just called it back then leg perthes, where your hip bone on my right side, my hip bone, it experiences necrosis, right? So the bone is not getting enough blood, and it's dying. And so what the treatment back then, and probably still to this day, because a 3-year-old, you can't do a hip replacement on a growing child, so they just keep you off the leg. So they put your leg in a little sling, you hitch it up every day and walk on your crutches. So my parents had to watch me because I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. I'm not supposed to be running around on my leg, because you go to the orthopedic clinic and there's somebody with a leg much shorter than the other because they didn't stay off their leg. And then I became a track star.
What?
So when I was 12, I was in 13, 11 to 13, I was like nationally, and actually all the way through to about 15, I was like a nationally ranked 400 meter and 800 meter runner. But the saving grace for my musical career was that I tore my hamstring when I was 15, and it took long enough to heal, and then I hurt my Achilles tendon after that. And so I started a band with an older guy who was in his 20s, and we started writing songs. And so it was over for me. You know, I wasn't going to run track. I wasn't going to go to college, and I was going to do music. So I kind of broke my parents' heart, but I went ahead and did it up front. You know, like I'm not going to take that path. And then right when I decided maybe I should go back to college, that's when I moved to Nashville. So I just had to make that decision.
Yeah.
Go back to school or move to Nashville. And Nashville was calling 1988, 87 really, what Steve Earle, the great songwriter Steve Earle, calls the great credibility scare was happening in Nashville. And what that was that you had a major label, particularly MCA Records, had signed Steve Earle,
Lyle Lovett,
Nancy Griffith, Kelly Willis, a guy named, anyway, a bunch of people. And then you had mainstream country singers like Clint Black and Randy Travis. And then also over on RCA you had Foster and Lloyd, which was Rodney Foster and Bill Lloyd. Mm-hmm. And Bill Lloyd was a guy making indie pop records, like jangly pop, R.E.M, Love Tractor kind of records. And they had a #1 hit when I moved to Nashville. Like literally, when I moved to Nashville, Foster and Lloyd had a song that could have been a Nick Lowe song or an Elvis Costello song or Los Lobos. A cool song was #1 on the country charts. And so Jason and the Scorchers were still around. The Georgia Satellites were happening. Webb Wilder was already happening. So all these great kind of American roots guitar bands were just thriving in Nashville. So it was a no-brainer, really, because that scene was literally all coming to our shows and saying, why aren't you moving here? And so my alternative was to go back to college or go be where John Hyatt was and Steve Winwood and Rodney Crowell and Emmylou and Steve Earle and John Prine and David Olney and on and on and on. You know, you could just go on, right?
Yeah.
And that scene was welcome, had its arms open to me. So I went to Nashville in January of '88. And my band at that time, Will and the Bushmen, got signed to an EMI label within...
it looks like this.
Right,
so for the camera, this is my starting point.
Yeah. So we got signed to a developmental deal, which at the time, in the music business, I don't want to bore people to tears, but I'll say this. In the music business at that time, there was no cross-collateralization between Nashville and L.A. or New York or London. There was just country music separate in a pod over here with walls around it. Pop music over here. And pop music included everything. Metal, rap,
sure,
pop, you know.
Yeah.
And then every country was over here. And so they were walled off from each other in a bit corporate sense. And it didn't make any sense to us because we moved to Nashville because we knew Foster and Lloyd. And we met John Hyatt. And we loved, you know, all these... Webb Wilder, and it all seemed to be the same thing to us. But yet, when it filtered out into the world through the business, it was separated out. Mm. So I think at that point I started to understand that I wasn't going to fit in that particular structure. Also because the business told me that our band had to have one singer and we had to concentrate on one style, and that wasn't really our thing. We had 3 singers.
It didn't happen on the next record for sure.
Right. And so we tried to figure out how to thread the needle, and we went to Bearsville and made a record, the record you held up.
This one preceded it, though, did it not?
Yeah, we made that record
independently.
Yeah, we made most of that record in Slidell, Louisiana, which is right across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans.
I had a friend that lived there for a while.
And a guy named David Farrell engineered it. He's still working. He's we were lucky to have him. He ended up working with Elvis Costello and the Dirty Dozen brass band, and you know he's one of the great engineers of the modern time in New Orleans. And and then we recorded some of it, and it was all indie. But so the Bushmen made a record, and we toured as much as we could. And in our minds, we were doing the right thing, and the label was kind of like, why are they still touring? They don't, their song's not on the radio. So it was, it was a corporate rock era. And so we made another record that they didn't put out. It was a long...
That one?
That one. Yeah, you got it. And so we made that record, and the label didn't put it out, and it took us a year and a half to get it released on a label. And in my mind, it's about being in your 20s and time, a year and a half when you've been plowing forward and things have been happening for you like clockwork, and all of a sudden there's this roadblock where we own the master, we're not releasing it. Well, can we get permission to find another home for it? We'll let you know. And the legal department at Capitol and EMI wouldn't talk to our manager, so we were just stuck for almost 2 years. Finally got it placed. By that point, the band was, I guess our spirit was broken. It's not a terrible story. We didn't really get ripped off. We just were in the music business.
Yeah.
It's not a abnormal story.
Spit you up and chew you out a little bit.
It's more the actual average story of what happens to people. The outliers are the people that, well, for 5 years I was stuck in this deal, but then it came out and I became, the famous person But so I came out of that. Meanwhile, at the tail end of that, I met Tommy Womack, Grimy, who owns Grimy's Records, and the Basement East and the Basement in Nashville. He's become a pillar of Nashville's music scene. And Tommy Meyer, and we formed a band called the Biscuits, and we signed with John Prine's label, Oh Boy Records. Mm-hmm. And ironically, right around the same time I met Todd Snider. The same day Todd signed with Jimmy Buffett's label, Margaritaville Records /MCA, we signed with John Prine's label, Oh Boy Records. And we met in a coat closet at like an ASCAP party because we were trying to get out of there. We had our free beers and we wanted to leave, so we were looking for our coats. And so as we were talking about earlier, the band being like a marriage, I got married to my wife, and I became unmoored from the marriage of the band, and so I quit the band. I didn't want to be in band like that full time anymore. I wanted to just have my family, do what I wanted as a musician, as an artist. So I started writing songs, trying to figure out how to be a solo artist. Todd Snider calls me, and his first album, Songs for the Daily Planet, is coming out. This is late '94, and so I say, why not? I don't have anything else going on. I'll go out with Todd. This is a great record. I can play this kind of... The guitar player on the record was primarily Eddie Shaver, the late, great Eddie Shaver, Billy Joe Shaver's son, and Doug Lancio, who's now out with Bob Dylan. So it was great guitar playing on the record, people that I knew. So I learned the parts, went on tour. Todd and I had great chemistry. We toured for years. We made records. We wrote songs. I met Jimmy Buffett. Just pivotal stuff is happening. I meet Jimmy Buffett at a Todd Snider show at Tipitina's in New Orleans. Jerry Jeff Walker and Jimmy Buffett showed up at our show and sat in with us. And backstage at Tipitina's is about the same size as this studio room, which for the listener, it's not very big.
It's a bedroom.
For the watcher, you can see it's like a bedroom. 8 by 12, something. Yeah. So there's about 200 people in a room this size trying to have the party of the year with Jimmy Buffett and Jerry Jeff Walker and Todd Snider, and everybody's just trying to get out of there because there's nothing. It's not going to happen. The party's not going to happen. I'm standing I'm shoulder to shoulder with Jimmy Buffett, pressed up against the wall, and so I say, "Hey Jimmy, I'm Will. I'm from Mobile," and he said, "Oh, you're another escapee," and gave me that big room lightening smile. And I laughed and said, "Yeah, I guess so, yeah." And so then I was sort of, Todd lost his deal with MCA, and the band was sent home. There was no more tour support to take the band out in the bus. And he became the folk singer that he became again the folk singer he started as. And, everybody knows Todd as the solo folk singer, occasionally with hardworking Americans, but primarily it's the barefoot guy on stage telling the stories.
Right.
And so, which has been great. And I got to work with him on some great records. But I went home and sort of tried to figure it out. By the time we had a daughter and another one on the way, I'm working with whoever calls. Lucky for me, my friend Seamus, who was our front of house sound man with Todd Snider, had started working for Rodney Crowell. And Stuart Smith, Rodney Crowell's long time guitarist, got the Eagles gig.
Poor guy.
And so Stuart's like, well, I'm in my 50s. I've got this gig. This is going to be my
Retirement.
it's gonna, this is gonna be the rest of my life, hopefully. And so he goes off and does that. Rodney's like, I've been working with Stewart for 15 years. Who am I supposed to call? I don't even know. I haven't even thought about it. So Seamus said, you might try my buddy Will. He might be all right for you. So Rodney calls me, comes over to my house. I've got Rodney Crowell sitting right in my face saying, do you know this one? And he's like, till I gain control again, and, on and on. I ain't living long like this, playing all these songs that I know and that I love. And he says, well, I guess you'll do. And I'll see you at the airport.
What an endorsement.
Yeah.
I guess you'll do.
That's a good one from him, though.
Yeah.
King of the understatement. So we worked together for 7 years. So I actually toured with Rodney longer than I did with Todd. And we made some records. Never did really write with Rodney. I regret that. Maybe I can remedy that in the future. But and then through that time, that's how I met Emmylou. But in 2003, I got contacted by Jimmy Buffett. So we're talking 5 or 6, 7 years after I met him. He asked about me. He asked his niece about me. His niece is a friend of mine, and he said, what happened to that guy from Mobile? And she's like, what guy from Mobile? Hank Aaron?
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, Hank Aaron? What are you talking about? So Willie McCovey,
Yeah.
a lot of baseball players from Mobile. But he said, that guy that played with Todd. And so she said, well, he's in Nashville. So she called me and said, here's my uncle's address in the Hamptons. Send him some music because you're on his mind. And so I sent him everything I had, which at that time was my first 2 solo records, and a record called This and a record called Home Away. And then I sent him...
This is in my hands?
And then I sent him like a CDR of home recordings and demos. And I didn't hear anything for about 3 months. And then I heard from the Jimmy Buffett office, wherever it is, Key West, Florida,
Sure.
From the beach at Key West. I got the call, Jimmy wants to cut these 2 songs. I said, great. I didn't hear anything for another 3 months or so, and then I got another call. Jimmy wants you to come play on the album. Can you be in Key West in January 2004? And I said, yes. And so a new part of my life started. And we made a record called License to Chill, and this is the tail end of the time when a new record would come out by your favorite artist, and you'd trot down to Target and buy a CD.
Yeah.
So the record sold 1.5 million copies. It sold 250,000 in the first week, which doesn't even happen now for Taylor Swift, or Jay-Z, or whatever. So, or maybe Ed Sheeran. I don't know. But who are these kids? What are they thinking? So life is really good, but with something like that, and your own publisher, I didn't have a publishing deal. So you don't get paid for like a year. So I just continued doing what I was doing. I was making my indie records and playing with Rodney and playing sessions. I produced a couple of Todd Snider records during that time. Just doing what I was doing. And then a year later, I got the biggest check I ever got to this day, actually. But it wasn't. It didn't make us rich, but it was like a year's worth of money in one check.
Life affirming in its own little
Very
way.
life affirming. And so I kept in touch with Jimmy Buffett. That was kind of my lifeline to the big time.
I'm sorry for your loss, but I didn't know
thank
him,
you.
so
yeah, thank you. It was, and so we did that work for 20 years. Meanwhile, Emmylou called me at some point during that time and asked me to play guitar for her, and I said yes. And then she called me back the next day and said, I didn't realize you were still playing with Rodney. I'm not going to steal my friend's guitar player. And so I had to wait until 2011 for her to call again. And I got called for an audition. And there were 5 other guitarists. And I auditioned. And I think what got me the gig was mainly that I can play guitar well enough. But there were better like country pickers than me there, like super guitar players.
Yeah.
But I knew that the best of those super guitar players, there were 3 of them who are self-proclaimed non-singers. And I thought, they're not going to get the gig.
Because she needs background vocals.
Everybody sings in her band.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, good luck, guys, but I'm going to go in there and sing. And I remember we played all the 6 songs they told me to learn, which were a couple of songs from her new album, a couple of songs from like Wrecking Ball era, and then a couple of classic luxury liner, fast country kind of songs.
Sure.
And then after that, she hit me with a surprise, which I had not been told to prepare for. She said, well, let's see how you do a duet. And she goes, let's do Love Hurts.
Oh.
So, I mean, I know
course.
the version of Love Hurts from the Graham Parsons record. So I just said, and she put her guitar down. So it's just me and an electric guitar. Nobody else is playing, standing in the middle of a rehearsal facility. And she goes, you take the first verse and then switch to harmony. And so I did the best I could. So I think she was just looking for somebody that would go, okay, I'll try it, and so we started and kind of it fizzled out. She goes, okay, that's cool, thank you. But everybody in the band except for one person was like a best friend of mine. So when I walked in the room, everybody got up and gave me a hug and laughed. We were laughing and smiling, and I think I could just see in her face, she was like, this guy will get along on the road.
Yeah.
The most important thing.
Yeah.
Because you can train a raisin to play the guitar.
A raisin. That's a stretch, but okay. Yeah, but they don't have arms.
I'm talking about the California
I was going to say,
raisins.
wait a minute, the California raisins, yes.
But anyway, so and so at that point, it's 2011, and from then until now, my father had dementia for 5 or 6 years. That was quite a journey. In that time, I formed a band called Willie Sugar Caps, and it turned out to be a lifeline for me to be able to go down to my home in Mobile as often as I needed and be able to work. Because we had a band down there. We'd play Jazz Fest, all the festivals on the coast. We'd play that place I mentioned called the Frog Pond. And that's not the only thing. It was an amazing time. It was the chemistry between the people in that band was kind of staggering to have that kind of chemistry in a band after all those years of go back to the early 90s. I'm not going to be in a full-time band anymore. I don't have room in my life for it. To a bunch of adults where we could just show up together, rehearse backstage, work up harmonies, and go out there and play a show. And nobody ever questioned, do you guys ever rehearse? Because it was a band that worked for our lives. So it was an adult band. We can show up, I'll tell you this song's in A, play it for you, work up a harmony, get out there on the stage at like Jazz Fest and play it. And nobody thought we were off the cuff. It was amazing. But all things must pass. A couple of members of the band were really into some of the stuff that was happening around the 2020 election. But mainly they just quit the band at the beginning of 2020, before even COVID and before crazy politics stuff. So I'll just say that the band broke up before that even happened, because there were people that loved Willie Sugar Caps that always asked me, what happened to you guys? Did you fire those guys? And I'm like, no, they quit before they even declared their allegiance to weird politics.
Nicely phrased.
And weird beliefs.
Yes.
So that happened to that, but I'm just grateful that I got to do it, because I still play with Grayson Capps, who's a great artist, and Corky Hughes, who's a great musician, and I still play with Emmylou. And then, I know this is such a, not a tangle tale, but it's a long tale.
It's a long tale. You haven't given me a chance to get you a song in here, but we'll do that in a second.
But I was playing on an album by Mary Gaucher called Rifles and Rosary Beads, which was Grammy nominated. She did a TED Talk about her work with combat veterans and their spouses and their families. And it's a masterpiece of an album. So if the listener, you haven't heard Rifles and Rosary Beads by Mary Gaucher, Gauthier, you should hear it, because it's up there with Prine and Mary Chapin Carpenter and just great modern singer-songwriter records. I got to play on it, and she would tell us a story about getting together with, a wounded warrior and his wife, or a wounded warrior and her husband, or whatever, or her wife, or his husband, or whatever, families of people and groups, and writing the song and tell us the story, and then play us the song, and then we would write out the chord chart and start crafting the song in the studio. And then in the middle of the week, she said, why aren't you doing this work? And I said, well, nobody's asked me to do it. So the next day I got a call from Rodney Foster and Darden Smith, and I became a team member of Songwriting with Soldiers. Meanwhile, they developed a post-traumatic growth program called PATH, P-A-T-H-H, and I'm not going to mess up what it stands for, but it's a post-traumatic growth, which is a fairly new technique for treating post-traumatic stress that involves less group therapy and medication and a lot of other things, and teaching yourself things you can do to deal with the effects. You can learn to meditate. You can learn to, things like yoga and just taking care of your body and changing your diet, and also learning to tell your story so that you can make a connection with other people. Because the farther you go into PTSD, the less connected you are to anybody else, because you're ashamed of your story, no matter how unshameful it is. And so it's just a symptom of it. It doesn't make any sense that somebody who went and did what they were ordered to do in the military would be ashamed of it. Although it does in a way. We know the history of war, that it's terrible and it's tough and it's destructive on everything. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, these are people trying to get better, and so it's extremely inspirational. So I do that. I probably travel 60, 70 days a year to do that work all over the country, from Maine to Florida to California to Washington to Montana to Texas, Missouri, Georgia, South Carolina, Northern Virginia, etc.
Yeah.
I'm doing it next week in North Carolina. So then it's 2020, and everybody has their own version of that story. So everything shuts down on a personal level. On a global level, of course, I was like, what's going on? This is the apocalypse, On a personal level, I was like, wow, look, I'm at my house for an entire season watching winter turn into spring. Is this what people usually do? And of course, spring 2020, where I live, was the most beautiful spring ever. It was just idyllic. And at the same time, this strange new world. But that's when the post-traumatic growth work with PATH started, and I was chosen for that team because I'm such a road dog, and they knew I could fly somewhere, get a car, drive to a retreat center, take a nap, meet with everybody, write a song the same day, go back the next day, do a follow-up about how we had the conversation and it turned into a song, record the song in my own little portable studio, perform it, and be out of there by 10 a.m. and back home that night. So it's kind of a brutal couple of days.
Yeah.
But it's incredible. And so I started doing that, and then Emmylou started touring again. I started touring again. Recording sessions started to come back. So my plate was incredibly more full than ever in 2021, 2022, 2023. And I love it. I love it. It's very, we've incorporated our lives. We block out dates for us. My wife and I, our kids are grown, out of the house. But so that's my story to now. And the Jimmy Buffett journey started back, like I said, in 2004, and it carried on right up until his passing. Like every album he made, I played on or worked on, and he made a record of songs he recorded in the late 60s, accompanied by stories he told about his life at that time. And I'm like a co-producer on that record. I helped organize all the songs and all the spoken word parts, and worked on the mastering and everything and the editing. But every album, so 7 or 8 albums in that 20 years, and 20 or 21 songs that I worked on those records. So my connection with him was very deep, and it was almost purely musical. Like, we didn't go play golf or anything. We didn't hang out, but we hung out and created. And so whenever he called, we just popped right back in, started right over where we left off. And so the loss is a big one. But it's different from losing your bestie, But it's somebody that I worked with, and that kind of work, writing with somebody as good of a songwriter as he is, it's just pure joy. And he was a creative and open-minded person. So we were working with African musicians. We were working with musicians from all over the world from different times. Because of Jimmy, I got to work with Bill Withers. Mm. I got to work with Mark Knopfler. Wow. I got to work with Chimani Diabate. I got to work with Cedric Burnside, Lightning Malcolm, Toby Keith. I mean, it's just so wide open. He was like, yeah, bring him in. Let's do that. Let's get those guys from West Africa. Get that kora player, And a lot of people don't know that because, he's a famous guy who sells out arenas and stadiums. and it's party, and there's nothing wrong with that. Making people happy is a noble occupation. So anyway, that's part of my story, and the next song I'm going to play is one of the songs I wrote with Jimmy Buffett in this last year.
Okay.
And this is a song that started December 11th, 2022. Got to get my dates right. And Jimmy called me and said, "Are you ready for some homework?" And that's what he would say to me in these last 5 or 6 years. Was he'd say, "Are you ready for some homework?" And that meant I'm putting a record together. Let's write. And I knew when we wrote in 2019 for an album called Life on the Flip Side that came out in 2020. I knew he had cancer, and I knew he was getting treatments already. So I knew in the back of my mind in 2022 and into 2023 that he was into like 3-4 years of chemo. But he seemed so on and so positive, and he looked so good that it didn't cross my mind that he was dying. Although he knew, I suppose, that he was. I'm not trying to put any words in his mouth, but I mean, he got the diagnosis of Merkel cell carcinoma, which is, take these treatments as long as you can, and then you're gonna die. That's that diagnosis so far in medicine. So, but he was, fun to work with. He wasn't outwardly worrying about anything. He was just plowing on and with a big smile on his face and having fun, it seemed like. So I just went with it. He called me and said, "Are you ready for some homework?" I said, "Yes." He sent me 3 song ideas. He said, "I've got to go." He had to get his treatments in Boston and Houston. So he was, and lucky for him, he has a couple of jets to fly around on. So he was going to Boston, going to Houston. He's doing all his things. He goes to St. Bart in the winter and goes surfing, and goes to Santa Monica, and other times when it's cooler and stays on the beach, and then when it's warm he goes back up to the Hamptons and stays in Sag Harbor, and whatever else he does. And he was trying to play tour dates, and on December 19th I was sitting with those ideas on my laptop thinking, when am I ever going to get to these songs? It's the Christmas holidays. I've got house guests in from California. I'm trying to be a good host. I'm not trying to be a jerk to my dear wife and my kids who are in for the holidays. My friends that were the house guests on the morning of December 19th said, "I'm so sorry, we've got to work today. We've got to each work on our laptops." And I said, "Great."
I got a song to write.
So I had these 3 song ideas, and I sketched all 3 out that morning. It took me about 4 hours. And I sent Jimmy phone recordings. I spread them out. I sent him, one, the lyrics I'd sort of crafted from his ideas, and meanwhile he's on like a plane from chemo. He sends me back a message and says, one of the songs, I love it. He said, "I'm saving the other 2 like little treats for myself tomorrow because I love this one so much. I'm just going to wait." And so it was one of the sweetest notes I've ever gotten back from a co-writer in sort of a remote type situation. So this song, and we wrote 5 songs for the album. And the album's called Equal Strain on All Parts. And that is what Jimmy's grandfather would describe how a hammock works if you're going to take a nap. That if you're going to get in a hammock and be comfortable, there has to be equal strain on all parts. And his grandfather was also a boat captain who had grown up when there were still sails on like working boats. So he knew how a big boat with sails worked, and that was the same thing. With sails, you need to have equal strain on all parts to be able to steer a boat with sails. So anyway.
Son of a sailor, apparently.
Exactly, yeah. Grandson of a son of a sailor. So he sent me this idea for a song called Bubbles Up. And that's a diving term in this case, about when you're in the water in your dive gear and you get turned around for whatever reason, and they tell you, if you don't know where the surface is anymore, watch the bubbles. They're going up. And so this is a song about telling someone, just I can tell you, I know you feel lost. Follow the bubbles. There's the light up there. There's the air. There's the surface. You can go back to the world that way. And so I was surprised that Jimmy wanted to write a song about that. Even though he's written beautiful, poignant songs, That Son of a Sailor, Pirate Looks at 40, He Went to Paris, The Death of an Unpopular Poet, Tin Cup Chalice, on and on and on, beautiful songs. But in the 20 years I was writing with him, if I tried to write something too sort of somber, he might say, "Parrot heads don't want to hear that," And so he was very aware of
his
who
audience,
he was and his audience. So this one, but I knew after, at this point, 18, 19 years of working together, that he sent me an idea not for me to pretend to be him, but he wanted my take, which was an amazing thing. And it really hit me in the last 3 or 4 years that that's what he wanted. So I started to just let it go. I would write the exact song I wanted to write and send him my version of it and say, do with this what you will, whatever you want to do with this. And it started to get to where he would be like, "I like it. Let me just work on the lyrics." And that's what happened with this song. So when Jimmy passed away on September 1st, 2023, Paul McCartney started sending out these social media posts. And the post that went out on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook from Sir Paul said, "I became friends with Jimmy in his last days, and he was a great guy, and I'm going to miss him. We became friends." And I played some songs for him while he was laying in the bed one night recently, in the days before he passed. Paul went over and did a little concert for him at his bedside, which is pretty incredible.
Wow.
And he said, and Jimmy played me some new songs, and he played me this one song called "Bubbles Up" that's a great song, and his vocal on it is the best vocal he's ever done. Wow. And so I was looking around at the day Jimmy died, and that popped up, and it blew me away. So of course the label rushes the song out, and and it's been a beloved song, but anyway, that's the story of the song. And the Coral Reefer Band is going to play Jazz Fest this year in New Orleans on the last night, May 5th, right before Trombone Shorty closes on the main stage. And we're going to do a celebration of Jimmy. So it'll be the Coral Reefer Band, plus I'm an honorary Coral Reefer. So I'll be playing guitar and whatever else they need. And we're going to have guest vocalists from the roster of, if you look at they've released the lineup of Jazz Fest. It's pretty strong, including the Stones and a bunch of great people. So, so the Stones are going to play. I'm turning 60 May 1st, and we're going to rehearse May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Stones are playing the 2nd. So it's going to be a good birthday.
Yeah, I think
going to be in New Orleans. And one last thing before I play the song. We were going to go to New Orleans in July with Jimmy and I. We're going to go. And for some reason, he just asked me to go. We were going to play on WWOZ, which is the Jazz Fest flagship station. It has been the whole time. And where Jazz Fest started at WWOZ. And we were going to go and play our songs, because one of the songs we wrote is called The University of Bourbon Street, and it's about Jimmy moving to New Orleans and learning how to be in a band in 1966 or 7, and being in a cover band on Bourbon Street and sort of cutting his teeth. And wonderful song. And the Preservation Hall band plays on it. It's a really cool track. And but I was literally out packing, putting my suitcase and my guitar in my trunk, and the phone rang and said, "Jimmy just can't go." And that was when he took a turn. So it was July, and then he passed on September 1st. I think he wanted to go play on the radio, and he wanted to play these new songs. And I think he really just wanted to go to New Orleans one more time. And the fact that he invited me was, I'll never know why, because I didn't get to talk to him again. But we had a great 20-year run of writing songs and making records together. In addition to, I was doing all my other stuff. I was in Emmylou's band. I was writing for Shamika Copeland and producing her albums, and she's getting Grammy nominations. We're getting all the awards from like Mojo Magazine for Blues Record of the Year, Blues Producer of the Year. Who knew? So great stuff is happening. I'm a lucky person, and all my saying yes to things that I might now wonder why I said yes to if the phone rang and asked me, can you engineer us at this house, at this cabin? And I'm like, I don't know how to engineer, but I would say, yeah, I can do it, because I was trying to make a living for my family.
Yeah.
But I learned to be a producer. I learned to be an engineer. Not that I'm a professional engineer, but I could do it if I had to.
Right.
Run a Pro Tools session or whatever. Bubbles Up, song I wrote with Jimmy almost exactly a year ago. So we started the process around December 11th. We really got going December 19th. We recorded the whole album the last week of January. So things moved really fast. The whole record got written in those months, And even in the studio, he was receiving chemo, but also just on 100% and creative. And we rewrote lyrics in the studio, like heavily, like the entire lyrics of one of the songs, like right there in the middle of the studio with everybody sitting around. So there'll never be another guy like that. Open-minded artist, popular performer. It's kind of like knowing Will Rogers or something, When this world starts reeling from that pressure drop feeling, just treading water these days, there's a way to feel better, be well set to weather the storms till the sun shines again. When your compass is spinning and you're lost on the way, like a leaf in the wind, friend, hear me when I say, bubbles up, they will point you towards home. No matter how deep, how far you roam, they will show you the surface, the plot and the purpose. So when the journey gets long, just know that you are loved. There is light up above, and joy, there is always enough. Bubbles up. To my friends who are jolly when melancholy knocks, sometimes they let her in. They sit and share stories of flops and of glories, and it ain't half as bad as the bends. Sometimes living is a struggle, multiplied double, but they love it too much for the party to end. Bubbles up, they will point you towards home. No matter how deep, how far you roam, they will show you the surface, the plot and the purpose. So when the journey gets long, just know that you are loved. There is light up above, and joy is always enough. Bubbles up. So let's pop cork to the rough and the right, to the bright blazing days, to the sweet starry nights. Well, bubbles up, they will point us towards home. No matter how deep, how far you roam, they will show you the surface, the plot and the purpose. So when the journey gets long, just know that you are loved. There is light up above, and the joy is always enough. Bubbles up. Bubbles up.
Beautiful. Will
Yeah.
Kimbrough today on the Acoustic Alternatives program in Grove Studios in Ypsilanti. Again, a place that I mentioned at the beginning of the show is a good spot for a podcaster. If you're looking to record a podcast somewhere, start one up. They got 4 microphones and all the equipment you need, and an opportunity to record it onto a little mini flash drive, or bands or DJs. There's places for you to practice here as well. Just look them up, Grove Studios, Ypsilanti. And a big thanks to them for encouraging me to even follow this path. Losing my radio gig and having the ability to do this in a radio station setting, when I lost that, I didn't realize how much I missed it until I started doing it again. I'm like, oh, I love doing this.
Yeah.
This is an important part of my life. So thank you for that. You gave me like the whole story. I had questions. I'm going to have to go back and get those questions in between, because there are things you covered that I might want to revisit as part of your story. So let's see. No offense to everyone you've mentioned, all the great people that you've played with, the Emmylous, the Jimmy Buffetts. But if I had to pick one song from everybody that you mentioned and yourself that I would play and hit repeat on, and I've done it recently, I would go to this album and go Like Laughing, because that Like Laughing song also appeared on this album. Right. But that song makes me want to hit repeat. I love that song. Yeah. Do you ever do that one as a solo artist? I
do sometimes. Somebody's playing the bongo drums.
I bumped something apparently. That's weird. It stopped now.
I like it. I do sometimes. I was talking to, there's a podcaster and writer and screenwriter and producer named Brian Koppelman, who's responsible for the show Billions.
Okay.
And his father was Charles Koppelman, who was a record executive, who was actually, a long time just classic New York record man from back in the day. His parents were working class Jews from the Bronx, and he became the biggest guy in the music business, one of them. And that's who signed Will and the Bushmen. And so that's the song when I reached out to Brian, because I was working with Michael McDermott, who's a singer-songwriter from Chicago.
I remember him.
And Brian and Michael had worked together on some songs. And I reached out to Brian and said, I like your podcast, and I've been working with McDermott. And he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, oh, I still play that song, Like Laughing, because I play it on my guitar all the time,
Really?
So cool. When he heard it, he was a college kid, wherever he was going to college in Boston. Because Brian Koppelman is the guy who brought Tracy Chapman to
Electra,
like his dad, and then she ended up with an Electra. And his dad was the, EMI Capital, SBK, But it's an interesting time. Will and the Bushmen, we were also label mates with Daryl Scott, which is interesting, because then he became the uber session player and songwriter, And he is certainly, I call him the hillbilly Jeff Beck, because when you see, you think of him as more of a bluegrassy kind of guy, because he's from Harlan County, Kentucky, and all that stuff. But when he plays electric guitar, he's the hillbilly Jeff Beck. So go see Daryl Scott. I can play Like Laughing.
I would love that.
So this is a song, I guess you could call it proto-Americana.
Yeah.
But there's that bongo player again.
I think it's your cup.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Moving the cup.
It also could be my windscreen hitting the microphone.
Well, you can't move that. But,
nope.
Well, you can move it away from the microphone.
I did that.
But
good suggestion, though.
None of this is Grove's fault.
No, this is a user error.
One thing about the whole quote-unquote Americana thing is that it's not forgotten, but maybe it isn't mentioned as often as it should be, that part of punk rock and new wave was country punk, which was a short-lived thing, but nevertheless there it was.
Beat Farmers? Were they country punk?
Yeah, Jason and the Scorchers, Beat Farmers. And then you had people that skirted on it, like the Gun Club, who were like definitely punk band, but they'd covered Robert Johnson. And they had, they were interested in the dark side of Hank Williams and all that stuff, And then, of course, like all people my age, you really get turned on to country through the Rolling Stones, and all of a sudden then your parents' Hank Williams record, which my parents had those. They grew up with Hank Williams. That was their touchstone. That was their hero. Pre-rock and roll people. They didn't like Elvis. They liked Hank. And So that music was always there for me. And then bands like R.E.M., and especially in their early days, they would do if you were a big fan, you'd buy their singles, and the B-sides were all these cool. So one of their B-sides was King of the Road, like a kind of a piss take in the studio of King of the Road, where Michael Stipe didn't even really know the words, but it became a, and then Elvis Costello did Almost Blue, which was a country record.
George Jones, right?
Yeah, and he did the record with Billy Sherrill in Nashville, and then of course I bought my copy of, there was a Warner Brothers double album, twofer album of GP and Grievous Angel, Graham Parsons, and that's when I really discovered Emmylou. My sister had her early records, Pieces of the Sky, etc., and I liked them okay, but I liked those Graham Parsons records a lot. And so, when I get to play with Emmylou, when we play, Wheels, we've all got wheels to take ourselves away, I get to sing the Graham part or the Rodney part, whatever it is. So that's part of when I wrote this song, I had already heard those records. And I already had heard Hank, I'd heard Graham, I'd heard Elvis talking about Graham. So, and there is something to that. And I'd also heard R.E.M. talk about country and play King of the Road, etc. And play some of their earlier, they did. Just the cool, jangly acoustic guitar stuff.
Yeah.
Straight to Hell by Driving and Crying, classic song. So this is Will and the Bushmen, sort of that thing. So this is Like Laughing. Of course, my girlfriend broke my heart, broke up with me, and I wrote this song in the time it took to sit and sing it with my friend Rob Trucks, who was a pivotal person in the Tuscaloosa, Alabama music scene. He's the guy that booked, Sonic Youth at the club in Tuscaloosa and booked 10,000 Maniacs before they were playing big places, and the Soul Asylum and the Replacements and Alex Chilton when he came back out in the mid 80s. And so, and Rob was the guy who always had the cool records, and I got to tell this part of the story. When I was just out of high school, January 1983, I graduated high school June 82. And then I immediately saw The Clash with Lee Dorsey and the Meters at the Warehouse in New Orleans. So that changed my life. I saw my heroes, The Clash, but I also saw Lee Dorsey and the Meters, and that changed my life big time. Both of those things did. Then in January of 83, my little new wave band called Ground Zero opened for R.E.M. at the Sanger Theater in Mobile. R.E.M. just had they had the single out of Radio Free Europe and the EP out called Chronic Town. They were literally leaving from that show to go home and then go record Murmur. So it was about to be on for them, and never look back. But they had a crummy dented van. Peter Buck's amp was blown up. He had to borrow my amp. So for me, it was that, if you read those rock and roll books about when the Ramones played England in 75 or early 76, and everybody was there, the guys that formed The Clash, the guys that formed the Sex Pistols, the guys that formed the Buzzcocks, they were all there. And they saw the Ramones and thought, we could do that. Now, you come to find out, it's not easy to be in the Ramones. They were great. If you saw them play, they were great. It wasn't just screwing around. It was a great band. The records are great. The performances were great. And also, so were the Sex Pistols, and so were the Clash. But I hung out with those R.E.M. guys. They weren't necessarily all that friendly or unfriendly. They were just there. They were tired. They looked like me and my friends. They wore the same clothes from Goodwill. They had a crummy van. Buck's amp was blown up. He had to come to me and go, can I borrow your amp? And so it was that same thing of like, oh, it's not that I can do that. It's that they're just like me.
Yeah.
They're no different. They're only a few years older. So that really gave me, I always say, R.E.M. gave me permission to not only do my own music, but be from the South and not be apologetic about it. Not try to pretend I'm English and be like a new wave band with a fake English accent which up to that point I had been. And I think that night I probably sang my songs with some kind of fake English accent and a skinny tie, you know, a real self-consciously new wave thing, even though it was already 83. But it made me realize that you can just be yourself and be from where you're from and not worry about it, because there's also a massive leg up just to be aware of where you're from. I mean, look at great writers. William Faulkner, write what you know. He just lived in Oxford, Mississippi. Where the hell is that? But yet there's a whole world going on. Or as Tom Waits would say, there's a world going on underground. There's also a world going on above ground. So I wrote this with a broken heart. So let me see if I can hit the high notes. Like laughing. This is for you. This is for old Bushmen fans. And Brian Koppelman, hello. Seeing things real. After all, I lied. Ran away from what you think is wrong, what you think you gained. And what you expect is always supposed to disappoint. Even a strong will has a point. When hard stairs turn to water. These things I know, they come and go like laughing. These things I know, they come and go. The things you saw brought to me, things you saw in a magazine, and you can't even think about the things you thought you would. Someone new discovered you, and you think that cash is the golden rule. Well, gold is a rule for you, yes, I know. These things I know, they come and go like laughing. These things I know, they come and go. I know they come and go like laughing. These things I know they come and go. Yeah, these things I know they come and go like laughing. These things I know they come and
Will Kimbrough on Acoustic Alternatives. Thank you for that. That was a joy for me to hear.
Yeah, I guess I wrote that when I was about 22. So that's
it's an old one.
38 years ago.
Yeah, almost 38 years ago.
But that's a good one. Get inspired by whatever you get inspired by. One thing I've learned in the years hence is that you can also get inspired by just listening to somebody else talk. So that's part of that Songwriting with Soldiers work that I do. I'll be doing it next week, and I'll be listening to other people. And it's a nice thing after a lifetime of being a singer-songwriter and like paying attention to your own thoughts and your desires of what you want to say, or hearing a cool phrase that you want to turn into a song. Or, and I will say this on that Bubbles Up song, I used what I've learned how to listen through Songwriting with Soldiers with Jimmy Buffett. I just listened to him, and I let him say what the song needed to say. And then I let myself be myself completely. I know that sounds like, well, what else would you do? but I wasn't trying to do anything else but just give him an unfiltered 100%. This is my idea, and you can change it or reject it or whatever. And that was definitely one where he was ready to say, "Yeah, this is great. Let me just work on the lyrics." So I'm glad I have that song. I'm glad I have both of those songs because I mean, Like Laughing is definitely one that you hit a lick. I remember playing some college town in the South, and we had not played that song that night. And this young woman came up to me afterwards, just literally like in tears, "Can you please play that song for me?" And I stood out in the parking lot and played it for her. And it was like one of the first times that I experienced a song I had written being important to someone.
It's important to me.
Emotionally, so...
Yeah. I don't know why it connects with me emotionally, but it does. Just something in the way you sing it and the way it's written and the melody is just... It struck a chord.
It hit me singing it this time that's something about the way you say, "These things I know, they come and go." There's something about the way those words come out of your mouth. And that is part of writing. It's not just what you say. It's how it sounds coming out of your mouth or how it feels. So sometimes you have to... John Prine is a master of that. Like, I've read reviews that were kind of, I guess sometimes a reviewer's got to be critical of something. So it'd be like John Prine, the greatest lazy songwriter of all time, because sometimes he would leave in what would seem like a non sequitur, like hot dog bun, my sister's a nun, but at the end of, whatever that song was, Fish and Whistle or something. But to me, that's who he was. To tossing off the funny line in the midst of, after you've heard Sam Stone or Hello in There, something that just shatters you.
Yeah.
Then he's like, "I'm going to give you a break. We're just people,
Let's laugh a little bit.
Yeah.
Be goofy.
First, the first job I had, I said, "Thank you and please." They made me scrub a parking lot down on my knees, and I got fired for being scared of bees. They only give me 50 cents an hour. I mean, come on. It's John Prine. Right. And we miss him. That's a guy who, that's a guy who made people happy and also shattered you. But the same was with Jimmy Buffett. I had a close friend who knows a lot about music. When Jimmy died, said, "Oh, I'm sorry about your friend, but he made a living singing about cheeseburgers." And I said, "Well, yeah, that's one of his songs. But if you ever heard He Went to Paris, or if you ever heard The Death of an Unpopular Poet, I mean, these are." Or even just A Pirate Looks at 40, it's a perfect song that tells a story in a perfect way. Or I listen to Son of a Sailor. It's everything about it is great. The little bass line, doom, 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 boom, boom, doom. And when that drummer hits the cymbal, like the bells like ringing in the wind at a shipyard or at a harbor, it evokes something utterly cinematic. And just somewhere south of disorder. He's using these terms that are really just, south of disorder is just a nautical term about some wind pattern on the earth in the ocean, but south of disorder is just incredible.
Well, for the sake of time, because we're kind of already running out of studio time, I have a few more questions and we'll wrap it up.
I know I'm verbose.
Oh no, you're giving me great stories, and I'm loving having a chat with you. It's been really nice. I'm sure you don't ever get asked about this song, but we are in the Detroit area. Mm-hmm. 3 girls from Detroit.
Yeah.
What the heck is that about?
So there was a band from Detroit called the Vertical Pillows. So they were like, a little. It was 3 young women, Mary, Paula, and Monique, I think were their names, because the lyrics say, "Here comes Mary, Paula, and Monique, and some alcoholic thunders freak." So we bonded on our love of the New York Dolls and Johnny Thunders. I had just met Johnny Thunders at that time, so I got to tell him the story that I met Johnny Thunders in New York. And they opened for us in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, at the bar where all the bands play, or Alex Chilton and 10,000 Maniacs played. And but we were like we were one of the popular bands that came through. And so we had a big night with them.
Cool.
And I'm pretty sure that our bass player, ran off with their bass player, and they stayed up all night and,
did things
that young people do. And so that song really comes from that, and it's it's our big hard rock song. So it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, we're trying to write sort of a big like Detroit rock, but it's not like listening to the Stooges or something. It's definitely fun, but Three girls from Detroit, you know, they're rocking tonight. Three girls from Detroit. Well, everything feels all right. I could, anyway.
I got the lyrics right here, but that's okay. No.
I could hang around for about an hour or two with some Midwestern industrial girl like you. You came down south, guitar in your hand. You showed me the meaning of a rock and roll band. Three girls from Detroit that are rocking tonight. Here comes Mary, Paula, and Monique, and some alcoholic thunders freak. Anyway.
You remember, when was the last time you actually played that?
It's been years.
Right,
but it's
the
just
fact that
in
you can remember that, it's amazing.
In the muscle memory.
Yeah.
So that's just a story. It's a story song.
Yeah.
And it's just
a fun one, too.
Out of the blue with a good riff. I remember we recorded that in Bearsville, New York, and there was a Marshall amp, like the iconic, you know, amp on top of the cabinet, and it had Bowie spray painted on the side. So it was a touring amp of Bowie. So I was like, I got to use this.
Yeah.
Mick Ronson must have played through this. Maybe. It's the stencil on the side. I mean, it was at Bearsville, so I mean, I have a feeling it was
legit.
Yeah. And so yeah, I played my big loud rock song through the David Bowie, Mick Ronson, Marshall. So that's appropriate for the glam aspect of it. I mean, and I'll say this too. Well, you may have another question, but I'll never forget we were playing for the distributor, which was Capitol EMI Angel at the time.
I was a buyer in a record store. I actually know that.
So you know Angel, yeah, EMI Angel. So we played the EMI distribution party at the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta.
Nice.
And we played for about 8 a.m. for all the Angel buyers, and they all sort of had asymmetrical haircuts and like shoulder pad suits on. It was the late 80s.
Yeah.
And I remember they had screens up there too, so we were on a stage playing, and then they had screens of us. And I looked up and I thought, there's no way that this band is going to work on MTV. And I was right. Things you don't want to be right about. But I knew I was like 24 going, oh, okay. But making that record in Bearsville, which is basically Woodstock, you know, we met Rick Danko. We stayed in Richard Manuel's cabin. We stayed in Levon's barn. We met Marshall Crenshaw. We met John Sebastian. We played ping pong with Alice Cooper. John Anderson from Yes came and bummed a cigarette.
Fun.
And just stuff like that when you're, you know, and everybody that knew Don Rubin and Charles Koppelman, they had been the managers of the Lovin' Spoonful and also the president, the people that ran Kama Sutra Records.
Their record label for Lovin'
So
Spoonful.
the classic double, you know, your managers are your publisher and your label.
Yeah.
So they got all the money. With all due respect to those guys and their estates and families.
Yes.
So when I met John Sebastian, he said, "Oh, I hear you're working with Charles and Don." I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, keep your wallet firmly stapled to your butt." And he walked out. And then we met Marshall Crenshaw, and our record was produced by Richard Goddard, who was known for producing Blondie and producing the Go-Go's, and Marshall Crenshaw. And he came and said, "Oh, you're working with Richard?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, good luck with that," you know. And then, so it was definitely like, what's going on? And is there a Greek chorus telling us, you know?
Don't do it.
But nobody did anything wrong in that case. It was like, I remember asking my lawyer, did we sign a bad record deal after we had signed it? You know, we're all having a drink afterwards, and I said, did we sign a bad record deal? He goes, no. If there's money made, you'll get some of it. He goes, you're in bed with the devil.
Sweet.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. So we first met today physically, but we met online when you were buying a record from me on eBay, which is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, selling a record to somebody else.
Yeah.
So that was about writing your book. Condense the book story because we're kind of running out of time. There's a book coming, or is there not a book coming?
Well, it's just, I started it in 2020 when I had time, and I worked daily. And then 2021 came around, and also mid-2020 I started back with my travel for Songwriting with Soldiers, so I was rudely interrupted from my writing practice because then it was like, well, I need to make a record. I need to make a Shamika record. I need to make another Shamika record. I need to write with Jimmy. I need to go on tour with Emmylou. So I need to get back into my practice of, there's things beeping.
Yeah, I don't know what's beeping, if it's the camera saying I'm dead, but we're still recording, so we'll have audio.
So it's a long time work in progress, and also since you've heard sort of the verbal condensed version here, it's a long story with every time I write one story, it leads to 3 others, and that's part of that process. So I'm gonna
you keep talking.
I'm going to. I mean, this is actually conversation inspires me to get back on it, and my wife's actually writing down sort of a memoir that she hopes to turn into a novel and change all the names, because my wife has a great story. Her parents were from New York City, who went to San Francisco in '68 and lived literally on the corner of Haight and Ashbury, and so she was 2 years old. And then they were some of the people that in San Francisco founded the movement to form the commune, The Farm, which is still a land co-op in Tennessee, Summertown, Tennessee, near Nashville. So they drove around, they outfitted 50 school buses with like wood stoves and bunks, drove around the country until they found a place that they wanted to try to buy, and the locals said, okay, we'll sell to you hippies. Think about it, 1971, the men all look like Charles Manson. And let's not forget that was the biggest story of that time in our country. So 50 school buses full of guys that look like Charles Manson pull up, and women that look like the Manson girls. I'm sorry, mother-in-law, but that's what they looked like to people. So it's incredible to me. There's a great podcast called You Must Remember Manson that fleshes out the whole connection with Hollywood and the music business that was hinted at in Vincent Bugliosi's book, Helter Skelter. And it just reminded me that my wife was a little tiny kid on this caravan of 50 school buses pulling up into your town. And after a while, the word got out, and the people would call ahead, say Grants Pass, Oregon, and say, these hippies are coming. And so the sheriffs would be waiting at the county line for them and search the buses. And
I wish that was the worst problem we had today, that hippies were coming.
Right, exactly. So, but then they went to Summertown, Tennessee, and the locals were like, yeah, you can buy this land and you can start your commune here. Isn't that crazy?
It was weird.
And that changed Middle Tennessee forever, because all of a sudden they had what became a commune of 1,500 people. And then when couples would split up and, the guy would need to move out and go get a job, he'd go to Nashville. So Nashville, right around the same time of like Townes Van Zandt and Rodney and Guy Clark and young Steve Earle are moving there, young John Hyatt. Then the hippies from The Farm were there too. So it was a perfect vortex for what was to come. But of course, it still turned into what country music is now, which is,
less country. All right, so new album coming as well, you said.
New album called For the Life of Me. That's coming in May. It's actually being released while I'll be at Jazz Fest, so that's exciting for me. And I'm excited about it. I think it's a wonderful record. And but as a singer-songwriter, of course, the first thing I think of when I finish a record is like, now I can make another one. So we just tracked 12 songs for Shamika Copeland that I'm producing, and I helped write 7 of those songs. Cool. So that's happening. Buffett's record is out there, Equal Strain on All Parts. Go give it a listen. There's some wonderful songs. We got to collaborate with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. We got to collaborate with, I co-wrote and I sing on the same song as the incredible African artist Angelique Kidjo.
Oh, yeah.
So my homely voice is on there, and then she starts singing, and we co-wrote the song with Jimmy and Mac McAnally, and actually another African artist who is no longer alive, but Jimmy had inadvertently borrowed from this guy's song and realized, he's like, oh, I took his song, so he just made the guy a co-writer, and his estate agreed, that was fine. So it was interesting, and so that I got through Shamika, we're collaborating with all kinds of artists like we've done on the last few records. We've collaborated with everybody from Jason Isbell to the Creole artist Cedric Watson, and the North Mississippi artist Cedric Burnside, and the High Records Al Green organist, Reverend Charles, and
cool.
So Charles Hodges. So that opportunity is always great. Like I said, I'll be with the post-traumatic growth group, either combat veterans or a combination of combat veterans and first responders, next week in North Carolina. I'll be doing that more than 20 times in this year. So it's a busy life, and I know I'm supposed to be talking about my album and all those things, but to me, all those things rolled into one just make it what the life that I love, which is to be busy, but to be fully employed, which is different from just being working all the time. It's like your senses are employed. Mm-hmm. Your senses are working overtime.
XTC.
I like that, yeah. And
I'm sitting with a jukebox, I think.
Jangling jukebox.
Will the album be released on a label, or are you independent?
The album's released on my own label. Okay. I've released several records on the Daphne label, which is named after one of my dogs that passed away. And it's distributed by Soundly, which is my friend Stephanie Hudacek's distribution company that goes through The Orchard. So it just goes through the same old distribution chain that used to be Sony Red. Mm-hmm. And so it's great to work with those folks. And you know who owns The Orchard? Who started it?
I don't.
Richard Gotterer.
Oh, wow.
So Richard Gotterer still got my masters. I'm just kidding.
Give back. No.
But it's great. I love Richard Gotterer. Working with him was fantastic. We made that Bushmen album together. Richard co-wrote I Want Candy.
Oh.
Richard co-wrote The Nighttime Is the Right Time. Oh, sorry, I hit the mic. So I Want Candy, the Bow Wow Wow song. He was in the Strange Loves that did the original version. I want candy, and then he wrote, well, the nighttime is the right time.
I know that by Jake Giles myself.
Yeah, I want to be with you in the nighttime. So their shtick was, the Beatles were the biggest thing, so they pretended to be Australian. So they had these fake British accents and said they were from Australia. And they had some great stories about touring and being down south and being, these guys from the Bronx whose parents were immigrants from Eastern Europe, Jews from the Bronx, and they're in like Birmingham, and the promoters thinking they're from Australia. So it's just freely talking about what he thinks about black people and Jewish people, and they're just like, all right, mate, incredible stories. So I gotta finish my book. I mean, I think the only way for me to do it is to keep the theme of why keep doing it if you're not a big household name, famous, rock star, and you also haven't written any songs that are like bona fide #1 hits. Why keep doing it? And so part of what I've been talking about today is the why. Because the phone keeps ringing, and it's somebody like Emmylou, or it's somebody like Shamika, or somebody like Todd Snider, or somebody like Jimmy Buffett, it's somebody like Rodney Crowell. And it's somebody like Mary Gauthier and Darden Smith asking me to listen to people's epic stories of recovery from trauma or through trauma, and I get to write down what they say and try to turn it into a song right then and there. And I'm able to do it every time because you know what? I said I would, and I have to. And I love that. Love that. It's so good for a writer to be like, it's not like, oh, we tried to write a song. We didn't get one today. But we had lunch. It's more like I listened. I wrote down what they said. I did not think about what I thought about it. I wrote it down, and I tried to figure out how it works together as a song. And then when you sing it back to somebody, this is a fascinating thing. More often than not, they don't recognize the words being sung, even if it's literally what they said. They say, how'd you come up with that? And I'll say, that's exactly what you said. And you read it out to them or you show it on a piece of paper, and they go, oh, right. But when you sing it, it's transformed. And that's the power for the healing part of it is that all of a sudden your story that 3 days ago you wouldn't tell anybody and wouldn't look anybody in the eye, somebody's singing it back to you without any judgment, and it's transformative. And I'm not taking credit for these guys' recovery because it's the team of people that are all have been through the same program. So there's nobody there that, besides me, that hasn't experienced the same kind of trauma. All the teachers, your meditation teacher, your yoga teacher, everybody's part of the program. So if somebody doesn't want to talk, they go, well, let me tell you my story from Kandahar 2005. And they'll be like, oh, you were there. It's like, yeah. And so there's a relatability and there's a power in it. So I'm the luckiest guy in the world to get to do all those things. However, under the radar, some of it is because playing guitar for somebody, there is a penalty you pay for being a quote-unquote side man. in the music business. Not so much anymore because there isn't really much of a music. When you're 60 years old, it's like you're not going to get a record deal. So I'm not going to get a record deal. Neither are you. But
no, I'm not talented.
But well, you don't have to be talented. But but if you were 17 and you could dance on TikTok, you might be able to get signed to.
That's true.
You know, there's actually still an Elektra Records and a Chrysalis Records. There still exist.
Yeah.
Isn't that a trip?
I know.
I know a kid from Mississippi who got signed because he was making records in his bedroom, and that he got one song got like 8 million or 80 million spins on Spotify, and he got signed to like Chrysalis. I was like, wow, Chrysalis still exists. I mean, that's insider talk. Sorry, podcast listener. We're talking about music record labels, so that's the book is about why you keep doing this. A friend of mine who's written a couple of books said you can't just write a book about tell your stories unless you're just going to self-publish, which I probably will. But I think it's the why keep doing it, why make it a lifetime pursuit if you're not a big success. And of course, living in Nashville, it's easy to answer that because you know people. You have your neighbor. My neighbor was David Olney, who was completely unknown, but yet when Townes Van Zandt was asked, who's your favorite living songwriter, he always said David Olney. And yet that didn't mean that anybody in Nashville wanted to hear his songs. It just meant that he could go play in Europe and the 40 people at the club in Berlin would be like, he is Townes Van Zandt's favorite writer, you know?
Yeah, right.
So it's but that didn't matter today because his pursuit was to write a great song as often as possible, but not stop writing that song until he thought it was finished. Whereas obviously, if you listen to me talk, I'm a little more ADD. Like I'm ready to move on to the next thing at the drop of a hat, and I'm definitely more of an improviser and drawing from my little encyclopedia of music that's inside my little head. And that's why I get to do session work and production work, because I can understand the references of an artist if they're talking about the blues or pop or jangle pop or country rock or punk rock or world music. So anyway, that's my superpower. It may not be worth $1 million, but it keeps me working.
Yeah.
And that's what my passion is, continuous creative work. And my dream has come true in a different way that I imagined it would when I was in my 20s, where I thought I'd be in a band and we'd be playing for 1,000 people and they'd know our song. And it came about in a different way.
It's a different dream.
I got to write a song with 1,000 people instead of having 1,000 people sing me back my song.
That's right. All right. So for the sake of time, because we are kind of out of it, one more song and then we'll just wrap it up. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So let's see. I'll do, what could I do? Okay, I'll do a song that links the Will and the Bushmen through my solo work. So I'll see if I can hit these notes today. So this is called Closer to the Ground. It's on my first solo record. It's the first song on there, and this is a sort of a note to an old friend. By the way, it's not Todd Snider, but so. In the time it took for you to make my mind up, lives and gray hair sprung up all around. Take a closer look. We could share the good things if you just fly a little closer to the ground. You've been flying high, living large, believing all the hype they feed you, didn't you know? Maybe you could try a little self-respecting, then maybe you won't fall down at the show. When you're closer to the ground, there's somewhere to plant your feet, and you don't get dizzy when you're coming down. When you're terra firma bound and you're not so high and proud, maybe then your feet, and you don't get dizzy when you're coming down. When you're terra firma bound and you're not so high and proud, maybe then we could talk it over, my old friend. Closer to the ground, you think a little clearer. I couldn't guarantee it, but you might get over all your trials. And if so, then in a while, maybe then we could talk it over, my old friend. Maybe then we could talk it over. Come on in. There we go. There you go, Pete Townsend.
Will Kimbrough is my guest today on Acoustic Alternatives. You can find that song on this record, which is called This. Look for it on your website. Is this still available to purchase?
Yeah.
Okay. So willkimbrough.com. I'll put the information in the description of the podcast, whether you're watching the video or whether you're listening to the audio on your favorite platform. I'll also put information about my Patreon page, which is the only way I get paid to do any of the things I do under the Acoustic Alternatives umbrella, which includes the playlist, which includes the podcast, which includes the radio shows I'm doing at Radio Cobra Detroit, as well as Sonic Coast, all doing those things for free just because I want to tell people about good music. And I'm so honored to be able to sit across from people like Will and do this here at Grove Studios.
Back at you.
Thank you. And this has been a great home for me for the podcast. So if you're looking for a place to do band practice, podcasting, DJ mixing, you can actually even listen to the masters of your records super loud in another room that's over there. Lots of really cool rooms over here in this space in Ypsilanti. Grove Studios is what you're looking for. And Will, what a pleasure.
Yeah, man.
Thank you so much for the time and the songs. And the next podcast is not lined up yet. I've been talking to a couple of other people, but this is the first of 2024. So I'm glad it happened. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.